The morning sun climbed over the ridge as Zelda Ramirez stood at the altar of Kennewick's small church, her ivory dress pooling around her feet, waiting for a groom who would never come. She had been standing there for nearly an hour, the whispers growing louder behind her, the pitying glances burning into her back like hot brands, and still she refused to turn around and face the truth that everyone else already knew. Thomas McKinley had ridden out at dawn with her dowry money and whatever dignity she had left in this town, leaving her with nothing but a crooked leg from the wagon accident 2 years prior, and the humiliation of being jilted in front of half of Washington territory. "Miss Ramirez," Reverend Patterson said gently, touching her elbow, "I think perhaps we should." "I know," Zelda said, her voice barely above a whisper. She finally turned, her hand gripping the cane she relied on more heavily these days, and began the long, limping walk down the aisle. Every step felt like an eternity, the uneven rhythm of her gait echoing through the silent church. Step, drag, step, drag. The sound of her own limitation, the reason Thomas had given in his cowardly note left on her pillow. "Cannot tie myself to a crippled woman. Need someone whole to help build a life." The words had burned worse than any physical pain she had ever endured. She made it to the door before her sister Maria caught up with her, but Zelda shook her head firmly. Just don't say anything." "Where will you go?" Maria asked, her eyes red-rimmed with tears for her older sister. "Anywhere but here." Zelda had saved enough from her seamstress work to buy a ticket on the afternoon stage heading east toward the cattle country. She could not stay in Kennewick, not with everyone knowing what had happened, not with their pity following her down every street. The Washington Territory in 1882 was harsh enough for able-bodied women. For someone like her, it would be unbearable to stay where everyone knew her shame. She changed out of the wedding dress in the back room of the dress shop where she had worked, carefully folding the ivory silk she had spent 6 months sewing by candlelight. Her traveling dress was practical, a deep green cotton that would not show the dust of the road. She packed her few belongings into a worn carpet bag, her hands shaking only slightly as she counted out the coins for the stage fare. $32 left to her name. It would have to be enough. The stage depot was crowded with travelers, mostly men heading to the ranching territories to find work. Zelda kept her head down, purchased her ticket to a place called Prescott Valley, where she knew no one and no one knew her. The clerk barely looked at her as he took her money. "Stage leaves in 20 minutes, he said, stamping her ticket. "You got any heavy luggage?" "Just this," she said, holding up her carpet bag. She found a seat on the bench outside, her leg aching from the morning's ordeal. The other passengers gave her curious glances, but no one spoke to her. She was grateful for the silence, for the chance to simply exist without explanation or excuse. The stage driver called for boarding, and Zelda pulled herself up with her cane, gritting her teeth against the sharp pain that shot through her hip. The accident had crushed her left leg when a wheel broke on her family's wagon coming through the mountain pass. The doctor had done what he could, but the bone had healed wrong, leaving her with a permanent limp and pain that worsened with weather changes or long periods of standing. Thomas had known about it, had courted her anyway, had promised it did not matter. She had been foolish enough to believe him. The stage lurched forward, and Zelda watched Kennewick disappear behind the dust cloud kicked up by the horses. Good riddance, she thought bitterly. Good riddance to all of it. The journey took 3 days, bouncing along rutted roads through scrubland and rocky terrain. Her leg throbbed constantly, but she refused to complain, refused to draw any more attention to herself than necessary. The other passengers changed at various stops, a rotating cast of miners, cowboys, and traveling salesmen, none of whom paid her much mind. She preferred it that way. When the stage finally rolled into Prescott Valley, Zelda was exhausted, covered in dust, and questioning every decision that had brought her to this remote corner of the territory. The town was smaller than Kennewick, just a main street with a handful of buildings clustered around a general store, a saloon, a boarding house, and what looked like a ranch supply depot. Mountains rose in the distance, purple and imposing against the afternoon sky. Cattle country, the stage driver had said. Ranching territory where men worked hard and asked few questions. She climbed down from the stage carefully, her leg nearly buckling under her as her boots hit the dusty ground. The driver handed down her carpet bag without comment, then climbed back up to continue on to the next town. Zelda stood alone in the street, suddenly aware of how impulsive this decision had been. She knew no one here, had no prospects, no job, no plan beyond running away from her humiliation. The boarding house seemed like the logical first step. The sign hanging outside read Widow Callahan's rooms, and Zelda pushed through the door into a surprisingly clean front room with worn but tidy furniture. A woman in her 50s emerged from the back, wiping her hands on an apron. "Help you, miss. I need a room," Zelda said. "Just for a few nights while I sort out my situation." The widow's sharp eyes took in the carpet bag, the dusty traveling dress, the cane. $3 a week, meals included. No gentlemen callers, no liquor in the rooms, and breakfast is at 6 sharp. "That is fine," Zelda said, counting out the coins. Her savings were dwindling fast. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the main street. Zelda sank onto the bed, finally allowing herself to feel the full weight of exhaustion and despair that had been building since that morning. What was she going to do? Her money would last maybe 2 weeks if she was careful. She needed work, but what could she do in a town this size? There was no dress shop, no call for seamstress work in a place where men outnumbered women 10 to 1. She allowed herself exactly 10 minutes of self-pity, then washed her face in the basin and changed into a fresh dress. She would go to the general store, introduce herself, and ask about work. Someone might need help with something. She refused to give up so easily. The store was dim and cluttered with everything from canned goods to horse tack. An older man with a graying beard stood behind the counter, sorting through a pile of mail. "Afternoon," he said, looking up. "You just come in on the stage." "Yes, sir. I am looking for work. Any kind of work, really. I can sew, cook, clean, keep accounts. I am educated and willing to work hard." The storekeeper scratched his beard thoughtfully. "Not much call for fancy sewing here, miss. Most folks make do with what they got. Cooking and cleaning, well, most of the ranchers handle their own or have hired men who do it. It is tough country for a woman alone, especially." He trailed off, his eyes dropping to her cane, especially a crippled one. Zelda finished for him, her voice harder than she intended. "I may limp, sir, but my hands work fine and my mind works better. I am not asking for charity, just a fair chance to earn my keep." The man had the grace to look embarrassed. "Did not mean offense, miss. Just being honest about the situation. Tell you what, the widow Callahan sometimes needs help with the heavier cleaning at the boarding house. And old Frank at the saloon, he is always complaining about needing someone to help with the books and ordering supplies. He cannot read too well himself. Might be worth asking." It was not much, but it was something. Zelda thanked him and headed for the saloon, ignoring the stares from the men lounging outside. The establishment was called the Lucky Star, and it smelled of beer, tobacco, and sawdust. The bartender, presumably Frank, was a heavy-set man with kind eyes and a handlebar mustache that would have been comical in any other setting. "Help you, miss?" he asked, surprise evident in his voice. Women rarely came into saloons, even in frontier towns. Zelda straightened her spine and approached the bar. "I heard you might need help with bookkeeping and supply orders. I am educated, I write a clear hand, and I am good with numbers. I am looking for work." Frank studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Show me." He pulled out a ledger filled with barely legible scrawls and obvious calculation errors. Zelda spent the next hour going through it, pointing out mistakes, reorganizing the columns, and suggesting a better system for tracking inventory and expenses. When she finished, Frank was grinning. "You are hired," he said. $3 a week to come in every afternoon and keep my books straight, handle the ordering, and manage inventory. 4 hours a day. That work for you?" It was not much, but combined with helping the widow Callahan, it might be enough to survive. Zelda agreed, relief flooding through her. At least she would not starve. She fell into a routine over the next few weeks. Mornings helping the widow with the heavy washing and cleaning. Afternoons at the saloon working through Frank's chaotic bookkeeping. Evenings alone in her room, sewing small repairs for a few extra coins here and there. The work was hard, and her leg ached constantly, but she had her pride intact and money for food and rent. It was more than she'd had standing in that church in Kennewick. The town slowly began to accept her presence. People nodded when they saw her on the street, though no one asked questions about her past. That was the way of frontier towns. Everyone had something they were running from or trying to forget. It was a Tuesday in late September when everything changed. Zelda was at the saloon, bent over the ledger and calculating what supplies Frank needed to order, when the door swung open and a group of ranch hands trooped in, dusty and tired from a long day's work. She barely glanced up until she heard a voice that seemed to carry authority even in casual conversation. "Frank, whiskey for my men. They've earned it." Zelda looked up then and found herself staring at the tallest man she had ever seen. He had to be at least 6'3", with broad shoulders, sun-weathered skin, and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. His eyes were a startling blue-gray, the color of storm clouds over the mountains, and when they landed on her, she felt something shift in her chest. He was younger than she expected for a ranch owner, perhaps 30 or so, with strong features and a jaw that looked like it had been carved from granite. "Who is the lady?" he asked Frank, his gaze never leaving Zelda's face. "That's Miss Ramirez," Frank said. "My bookkeeper." "Miss Ramirez, this is Garrett Hayes. He owns the Triple H Ranch, biggest spread in the valley." Garrett Hayes removed his hat, revealing the full impact of those extraordinary eyes. "Pleasure to meet you, Miss Ramirez." "Mr. Hayes," Zelda said, forcing herself to look back down at the ledger. Her heart was beating too fast, and she could feel heat rising in her cheeks. This was ridiculous. She had just escaped one disastrous romantic situation. The last thing she needed was to develop feelings for some rancher she did not even know. But Garrett Hayes did not seem inclined to let her ignore him. He leaned against the bar near where she worked, accepting the whiskey Frank poured but making no move to join his men at the tables. "You are new to Prescott Valley," he said. It was not a question. "I arrived about 3 weeks ago." "From Washington Territory, Kennewick. Long way to travel alone." He sipped his whiskey, studying her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "What brings a lady all this way to a rough town like this?" Zelda set down her pen and met his eyes squarely. "The same thing that brings most people to frontier towns, Mr. Hayes. A fresh start." Something like understanding flickered across his face. "Fair enough. We all got our reasons for being where we are." He paused, then added, "If you are looking to make a fresh start, though, this town is small. Limited opportunities for a woman alone." I am managing, Zelda said, trying to keep the defensiveness out of her voice. I am sure you are. He finished his whiskey and set the glass down. But if you are ever interested in better work, the Triple H could use someone who can keep books properly. My foreman handles most of it now, but he is better with cattle than numbers. Pay would be better than what Frank here can offer, and you would have your own cabin on the ranch property. Zelda blinked, surprised by the offer. You don't even know me. I know you reorganized Frank's disaster of a ledger system in under an hour your first day here. Frank told me. That's enough to know you have a head for business. Garrett put his hat back on, tipping it politely. Think about it, Miss Ramirez. The offer stands. He rejoined his men, leaving Zelda staring after him with a confused mix of feelings swirling in her chest. The offer was generous, perhaps too generous. What did she know about this man beyond his name and the fact that he owned a large ranch? But the idea of better pay, of her own space, of getting out of the tiny room at the boarding house was tempting. Frank leaned over the bar. He is a good man, Miss Ramirez. Garrett Hayes is the most respected rancher in the valley. Fair to his men, honest in his dealings, and he treats women with respect. If he is offering you work, you would be smart to take it. I will think about it, Zelda said, but her mind was already turning over the possibilities. That night, lying in bed with her leg propped on a pillow to ease the aching, Zelda thought about Garrett Hayes and his unexpected offer. She needed the money, that was certain. Her current work barely covered her expenses, leaving nothing for savings or emergencies. But accepting meant putting herself in close proximity to a man who had affected her in ways she had not felt since before Thomas's betrayal. Was she ready for that? Could she trust her own judgment about men after being so spectacularly wrong? She spent 3 days wrestling with the decision before finally accepting. Frank was disappointed to lose her but understanding, and the widow Callahan assured her the room would always be available if she needed it. On a bright October morning, Garrett Hayes arrived in town with a wagon to collect her and her few belongings. "Ready?" he asked, offering his hand to help her up onto the wagon seat. Zelda hesitated, looking at his outstretched hand, then at her cane. "I should warn you, Mr. Hayes, I am not exactly quick or graceful. The accident that damaged my leg left me with a permanent limp, if that is going to be a problem for the work you need done." Garrett looked genuinely confused. Why would that be a problem? "You will be working with ledgers and accounts, not running races. Your leg has nothing to do with your ability to keep books." The simple, matter-of-fact way he said it made something loosen in Zelda's chest. She took his hand and let him help her up onto the seat, settling her cane beside her. The wagon lurched forward, and they headed out of town toward the mountains. The Triple H Ranch spread across a beautiful valley, with the main house built of timber and stone, surrounded by corrals, barns, and several smaller cabins for the ranch hands. Garrett gave her a quick tour, introducing her to his foreman, a weathered man named Jack Dawson who looked relieved at the prospect of handing over the bookkeeping duties. "Your cabin is just there," Garrett said, pointing to a small structure set slightly apart from the others, with a porch facing the mountains. "It is not fancy, but it is clean and private. I will have one of the men bring your things over." The cabin was indeed simple, but it was more space than Zelda had had to herself in years. A main room with a stove, table, and chairs, a separate bedroom, and even a small indoor pump for water. Luxury by frontier standards. "The books are in the office at the main house," Garrett continued. "You can work there or bring them here, whatever you prefer. I will need reports on expenditures, cattle sales, payroll for the men, and projections for the winter supplies. Jack can fill you in on the details. When do I start? Whenever you are settled. Tomorrow is fine." Garrett hesitated at the door, his hat in his hands. Miss Ramirez, I want you to know you are safe here. The men know you are under my protection, and anyone who treats you with disrespect will answer to me. You have my word on that." Zelda nodded, not trusting herself to speak. It had been a long time since anyone had offered her protection without expecting something in return. She spent the rest of the day arranging her small belongings and exploring the immediate area around her cabin. The mountains were beautiful in the autumn light, and the air smelled of pine and wood smoke. It felt like the fresh start she had desperately needed. The work proved to be exactly what Garrett had described. Jack was indeed better with cattle than numbers, and the ranch accounts were a mess, though not as bad as Frank's had been. Zelda threw herself into organizing the system, creating clear ledgers for different aspects of the operation, tracking expenses and income with precision. The work was absorbing, challenging in ways that made her forget about her troubles for hours at a time. Garrett proved to be a constant presence, though he never hovered or questioned her methods. He would come into the office to review reports, ask thoughtful questions, and occasionally bring her coffee when she worked late. He was unfailingly polite, keeping a professional distance that Zelda appreciated even as part of her wished he would do otherwise. It was a month before they had their first real conversation beyond business matters. Zelda was working late, trying to reconcile a discrepancy in the cattle sale records, when Garrett appeared in the doorway with 2 cups of coffee. "You will ruin your eyes working by lamplight," he said, setting a cup beside her. "I am almost finished. There is an error in the September sales that I cannot account for." Garrett leaned over her shoulder to look at the ledger, and Zelda was suddenly very aware of how close he was, the warmth of his body, the scent of leather and horses that clung to him. She forced herself to focus on the numbers. "There," Garrett said, pointing. "That is not an error. That is a payment I made to settle a dispute with a neighboring rancher. Jack must have recorded it wrong. It should be under miscellaneous expenses, not sales." "Oh," Zelda made the correction, and the numbers finally balanced. "I should have asked before spending so much time on it." "You are thorough. That is not a bad quality." Garrett pulled up a chair and sat down, which surprised her. He usually left after checking on her work. "Can I ask you something personal, Miss Ramirez?" Zelda tensed. "That depends on the question. Why did you really leave Kennewick?" She could have lied or deflected, but something about the genuine curiosity in his eyes made her want to tell the truth. "I was engaged to be married. On the day of the wedding, my fiancé left town with my dowry and a note saying he could not tie himself to a crippled woman. I was standing at the altar when I realized he was not coming, so I left. I could not stay there with everyone knowing what had happened." Garrett's expression darkened. "He sounds like a fool and a coward." "He was certainly the latter." Zelda closed the ledger. "I thought I loved him, but looking back, I think I just wanted to believe someone could love me despite my limitation. I was wrong about that." "No," Garrett said firmly. "You were wrong about him, not about whether you deserve to be loved. There is a difference." The certainty in his voice made her look up, and she found him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Garrett stood abruptly. "I should let you get back to your cabin. It is getting late." "Mr. Hayes," Zelda said as he reached the door, "thank you for the job, for treating me like a person rather than a problem to be solved. It means more than you know." "Garrett," he said, "if we are going to work together, you should call me Garrett. Then you should call me Zelda." He smiled, and it transformed his serious face into something almost boyish. "Good night, Zelda." After that, things shifted between them in subtle ways. Garrett found more reasons to be in the office when she was working, bringing her coffee, asking her opinion on business decisions, sharing stories about the ranch and his life. Zelda learned that he had inherited the Triple H from his father 5 years earlier, that he had built it from a modest operation into one of the most successful ranches in the territory through hard work and smart management, that he had never married because, as he put it, "I never met anyone who wanted to build a life with me rather than just marry into a successful ranch." Zelda found herself looking forward to these conversations, to the easy way they had developed of talking about everything and nothing. Garrett was intelligent, thoughtful, and surprisingly well-read for a rancher. He treated her as an equal, valued her opinions, and never once made her feel like her limp was something to be pitied or overlooked. He simply accepted it as part of who she was. The first snowfall came in late November, dusting the mountains with white and turning the valley into something from a painting. Zelda stood on her porch, wrapped in a shawl, watching the flakes drift down when Garrett approached on horseback. "Beautiful, is it not?" he called out, dismounting. "Stunning. We got snow in Kennewick, but not like this." Garrett tied his horse to the porch rail and climbed the steps. "Mind if I join you? It is your ranch," Zelda said with a small smile. "I can hardly refuse the boss. I am asking as a friend, not as your employer." The word friend sent a small thrill through her. "Then yes, I would like the company." They stood in comfortable silence watching the snow. Then Garrett said, "The men are planning a small celebration for Christmas. Nothing fancy, just food and some music. I hope you will join us." "I am not sure that is appropriate. I am staff, not family." "You are part of this ranch, Zelda. That makes you family as far as I am concerned." Garrett turned to look at her, his expression serious. "I know you have been hurt, and I know you came here looking for a fresh start, not complications. But I need to be honest with you. I have feelings for you. I have had them since the day I met you at Frank's saloon. I am not expecting anything, and I will never pressure you or make your position here uncomfortable. But I wanted you to know, because I am tired of pretending otherwise." Zelda's heart was hammering so hard she thought he must be able to hear it. "Garrett, I don't know what to say. I am not whole. I limp, I slow down, I am damaged goods in the eyes of most men. You could have any woman you wanted, someone who could keep up with you, who would not be a burden." "Stop," Garrett said firmly, taking both her hands in his. "You are not damaged goods. You are strong, intelligent, capable, and beautiful. Your leg does not change any of that. If anything, it shows how resilient you are, how you refuse to let an accident define or limit you." "You are not a burden, Zelda. You never could be," Thomas said. She began, but Garrett cut her off. "Thomas was a coward and a fool, and what he said does not matter. I am not Thomas." His voice softened. "I am not asking you to marry me or make any promises. I am just asking if you would let me court you properly. Let me show you that you deserve to be cherished, not in spite of your limp, but as the complete, remarkable person you are." Tears were spilling down Zelda's cheeks before she could stop them. "What if I disappoint you? What if you realize I really will slow you down, that I cannot be what you need?" Garrett reached up and gently wiped away her tears with his thumb. "Then we will walk together slowly," he said simply. "There is no race, Zelda, no finish line we need to rush toward. We will go at whatever pace feels right for both of us." The simple beauty of those words broke something open inside her. She had spent so long believing her worth was tied to her ability to keep up, to not be a burden, to compensate for her physical limitation. But Garrett was offering something different: acceptance, partnership, a willingness to adjust to her pace rather than demanding she struggle to match his. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I would like that." Garrett's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. He raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "Then I am the luckiest man in the territory." The courtship that followed was unlike anything Zelda had experienced with Thomas. Where Thomas had been impatient and dismissive, Garrett was thoughtful and attentive. He came to her cabin in the evenings after work, bringing small gifts like books he thought she might enjoy or wildflowers he had found on the range. They would sit on her porch talking until the stars came out, discussing everything from ranch business to philosophy to their dreams for the future. Garrett never pushed her physically beyond what she was comfortable with. When they walked together, he matched his pace to hers without comment or complaint. When her leg ached on cold days, he brought her a heating stone and extra pillows. He learned the small accommodations that made her life easier and incorporated them naturally, never making her feel like an inconvenience. The ranch hands noticed the change in their boss and treated Zelda with even more respect than before. Jack joked that he had never seen Garrett so happy, and it was true. There was a lightness to Garrett that had not been there before, a quick smile and easy laugh that the men said they had not seen in years. The Christmas celebration was everything Garrett had promised. The ranch hands decorated the main house with pine boughs and candles, and several of them proved to be talented musicians. There was a feast of beef, potatoes, bread, and even a cake that the cook had made special. Zelda wore her best dress, a deep blue wool that brought out the darkness of her hair and eyes, and when Garrett saw her, his expression made her feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. They danced, or rather, Garrett held her and swayed gently to the music, mindful of her leg. It was not the energetic square dancing the others were doing, but it was perfect. Zelda rested her head against his chest and let herself feel safe, cherished, and desired in ways she had never thought possible after Thomas's betrayal. "I have something for you," Garrett murmured near her ear. He led her away from the party to a quieter corner and pulled a small wrapped package from his pocket. "It is not much, but I saw it and thought of you." Zelda unwrapped it carefully to find a delicate silver locket on a chain. Inside was a tiny pressed wildflower, one of the ones he had brought her weeks earlier. "Garrett, it is beautiful. I wanted you to have something that reminded you that you are seen and valued," he said, fastening it around her neck. "Not for what you can do or how fast you can move, but for who you are." Zelda turned and kissed him then, her first real kiss since Thomas, and it felt like coming home. Garrett's arms came around her, gentle but firm, holding her like she was precious. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. "I am falling in love with you," Zelda said, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "I tried not to. I told myself it was too soon, too risky, but I cannot help it. You have shown me what it means to be truly valued, and I love you for it." Garrett's eyes were suspiciously bright. "I fell in love with you the moment you stood up to me at Frank's saloon with that fierce pride in your eyes. I have been yours ever since, Zelda. I will be yours for as long as you will have me." Winter deepened, and with it, Zelda and Garrett's relationship grew stronger. They spent every spare moment together, learning each other's rhythms and patterns. Garrett taught her to ride a gentle mare named Clover, adapting the saddle so her leg would not pain her too much. Zelda taught him to appreciate poetry and read to him in the evenings from her small collection of books. There were challenges, of course. Zelda had moments of doubt when her leg hurt particularly badly, or when she struggled to keep up during ranch activities. But Garrett was unwavering in his support, never treating her pain as an inconvenience or her limitations as defects. "We all have limitations," he told her one evening when she was frustrated with herself for needing to rest during a walk. "Mine is that I cannot carry a tune to save my life, and I am absolutely terrible at remembering birthdays. Yours happens to be visible, but that does not make you less capable or worthy. It just means we adapt. That is what people who love each other do." In February, Garrett took her to meet his mother, who lived in a small house on the edge of the ranch property. Elizabeth Hayes was a formidable woman in her 60s with silver hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. She looked Zelda over carefully, then smiled. "So you are the one who has finally captured my son's heart," she said. "I was beginning to think he would spend his life married to this ranch." "Mother," Garrett said, embarrassed, but Elizabeth waved him off. "Hush, I am allowed to speak plainly at my age." She took Zelda's hand and pulled her to sit beside her. "Garrett tells me you are from Washington Territory. That is a long journey to make alone." Zelda gave her the abbreviated version of her story, leaving out the most painful details of her humiliation. Elizabeth listened intently, then nodded. "Your former fiancé was a fool," she said bluntly. "My late husband had a bad leg from a war injury. It never stopped him from building this ranch, raising a family, or being the best man I ever knew. Physical wholeness has nothing to do with character or worth. I am glad my son is smart enough to understand that." The approval in her voice was unmistakable, and Zelda felt some of her lingering doubts ease. If Garrett's mother accepted her, saw past her limitation to the person beneath, perhaps she really did belong here. Spring came to the valley in a rush of green and wildflowers. The ranch was busy with calving season, and Zelda found herself even more involved in the daily operations, tracking births, managing supply orders, and helping coordinate the hands. She loved the rhythm of it, the sense of purpose and contribution. One evening in late April, Garrett asked her to ride out with him to a high meadow overlooking the valley. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, and the view was breathtaking. "I wanted to show you this place," Garrett said, helping her down from Clover. "It is where I come when I need to think to make important decisions." They sat on a sun-warmed rock, and Garrett took her hand. "Zelda, I know we have only been courting for a few months, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. You have brought joy and purpose to my days in ways I never expected. You are my partner, my equal, and the love of my life. I want to spend the rest of my days walking beside you, at whatever pace we choose together." He pulled a ring from his pocket, a simple gold band with a small but beautiful sapphire. "Will you marry me? Will you be my wife, build a life with me here on this ranch, and let me love you for the rest of our lives?" Zelda's vision blurred with tears, but she was smiling through them. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, Garrett, I will marry you. I love you more than I thought possible." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. They kissed as the sun sank below the mountains, sealing their promise to each other. The wedding was planned for June, giving them time to make arrangements and send word to Zelda's family in Kennewick. Maria was thrilled and promised to make the journey, along with their parents. Zelda found herself genuinely excited, so different from the dread that had filled her before her first attempted wedding. As the date approached, however, old fears began to resurface. She confided in Garrett one evening as they sat on her porch. "What if on the day of the wedding you realize you are making a mistake?" she asked quietly. "What if you look at me walking down the aisle with my limp and think about all the ways I will slow you down over the years?" Garrett set down his coffee cup and turned to face her fully. "Zelda, look at me. Really look at me. Do you see doubt in my eyes? Do you see regret or second-guessing?" She looked, and all she saw was love, steady and unwavering. "I am not Thomas," Garrett continued, echoing what he had said months earlier. "I am not going to run. I am not going to change my mind. Your limp is part of who you are, and who you are is the woman I love. If you are worried, we can talk about it every day until the wedding if that is what you need. But please believe me when I say I have never been more certain of any decision in my life." The The sincerity in his voice finally cut through her fear. "I believe you," she said. "I am sorry for doubting. It is just hard to trust after what happened. I know, and I will spend the rest of my life proving to you that you can trust me." He pulled her close. "We are going to have a beautiful wedding, a wonderful life, and I am going to love you through every single day of it." The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful, the valley dressed in summer glory. Unlike the elaborate church ceremony in Kennewick, this was a simple outdoor wedding held on the ranch, with a traveling preacher, the ranch hands, neighbors from surrounding spreads, and Zelda's family who had made the long journey to be there. Zelda wore a new dress she had sewn herself, ivory linen with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. Her dark hair was loose with wildflowers woven through it, and she carried a bouquet of those same wildflowers. Maria helped her dress and fussed over her like a mother hen. "You look beautiful," Maria said, tears in her eyes. "And Zelda, I have never seen you this happy. This is right. This is how it was meant to be." When it was time, Zelda's father offered his arm to walk her to where Garrett waited under an arch of pine boughs. Her leg ached from the morning's activity, and her pace was slower than most brides, but she held her head high. This time there was no doubt, no fear that her groom would abandon her. Garrett stood waiting with such love and pride in his eyes that she forgot to be self-conscious about her uneven gait. As she reached his side, Garrett leaned close and whispered, "You are the most beautiful sight I have ever seen." The ceremony was brief but meaningful. When the preacher asked if anyone objected to the union, the silence was absolute. When he pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that went up from the gathered crowd was genuine and joyful. Garrett kissed her softly, then more deeply, and Zelda felt every remaining doubt and fear melt away. This was real. This was permanent. She was loved fully and completely exactly as she was. The celebration that followed was lively, with food, music, and dancing. Zelda could not participate in the more energetic dances, but Garrett stayed by her side, content to hold her and sway gently or simply sit with his arm around her watching the festivities. "Happy?" he asked as the sun began to set. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Zelda replied honestly. "Thank you for being patient with me, for loving me through my doubts and fears." "That is what marriage is," Garrett said. "Being patient, being present, loving each other through everything. I am honored to be your husband, Zelda Hayes." The name sent a thrill through her. Zelda Hayes. She was no longer the abandoned, humiliated woman standing at the altar in Kennewick. She was the wife of Garrett Hayes, partner in building a successful ranch, loved and valued for exactly who she was. They moved into the main ranch house after the wedding, the larger space perfect for the life they were building together. Zelda continued managing the ranch accounts, but she also took on the role of ranch mistress, overseeing the household, managing supplies, and working alongside Garrett in all aspects of the operation. The first year of marriage brought both joys and challenges. There were moments when Zelda's leg gave her significant pain, days when the weather changes made it hard for her to walk. But Garrett never treated these moments as burdens. He simply adjusted, bringing work to her when she needed to rest, carrying her when the pain was too much, finding solutions rather than expressing frustration. In turn, Zelda learned to accept help without feeling like a failure. She learned that letting Garrett support her did not make her weak or dependent, but rather strengthened their partnership. They were a team, each bringing different strengths and working around each other's limitations. The ranch continued to prosper under their joint management. Zelda's careful accounting and business sense complemented Garrett's expertise with cattle and land management. Neighboring ranchers began asking for her advice on their own bookkeeping, and she found herself developing a small consulting business on the side. In the spring of their second year of marriage, Zelda realized she was pregnant. The news filled her with both joy and terror. How would she manage a child with her physical limitations? What if she could not keep up with a running toddler or carry a baby for long periods? She was sitting on the porch, one hand on her still flat stomach, worrying over these questions when Garrett found her. "What is troubling you?" he asked, immediately sensing her mood. "I am pregnant," she said, watching his face carefully. His expression transformed into pure joy. "Zelda, that is wonderful. Why do you look so worried? How am I going to manage a baby when I can barely manage myself sometimes?" The fear came pouring out. What kind of mother will I be when I cannot even walk properly? A child deserves better. Garrett knelt before her, taking both her hands. "Listen to me carefully. You are going to be an amazing mother. Yes, there will be challenges, but we will handle them together just like we handle everything else. We will adapt, we will find solutions, and our child will grow up seeing a strong, capable mother who does not let obstacles stop her. That is an incredible gift. But what if?" "No what ifs," Garrett said firmly but gently. "We will take it one day at a time. We will ask for help when we need it. My mother will be thrilled to assist, and we can hire additional help if necessary." "But Zelda, your leg does not determine what kind of mother you will be. Your heart does, and your heart is more than capable." His certainty slowly eased her fears. He was right. They would figure it out together. They always did. The pregnancy was not easy. The extra weight made her limp more pronounced, and there were days when the pain in her leg and hip was severe. But Garrett was endlessly patient, taking over many of her usual tasks without complaint, ensuring she rested when needed, and celebrating every milestone with her. Their son was born in early January 1884, during a light snowfall that seemed almost magical. The birth was difficult, Zelda's hip making the delivery complicated, but both she and the baby emerged healthy. They named him Samuel, after Garrett's father, and from the moment Garrett placed the tiny bundle in her arms, Zelda knew every fear had been unfounded. Motherhood was exhausting and challenging, but it was also more rewarding than she could have imagined. Yes, there were things she could not do as easily as able-bodied mothers. Chasing after Samuel when he started crawling required creative solutions. Carrying him for long periods hurt her leg, but she found ways around every obstacle. Garrett was an involved father, taking on many of the physical demands without hesitation. He wore Samuel in a sling while working around the ranch, took the middle of the night feedings without complaint, and delighted in every small milestone. And Samuel, as he grew, never seemed to notice or care that his mother walked differently than other women. To him, she was simply Mama, the person who read him stories, sang him songs, taught him his letters, and loved him fiercely. When Samuel was 2, Zelda discovered she was pregnant again. This time the fears were less intense, tempered by the knowledge that she had successfully managed one child and would manage another. Their daughter, Rose, was born in late 1885, an easier birth than Samuel had been, and she completed their family in ways Zelda had not known were possible. The years flowed by in the way of happy lives, marked by small joys and occasional challenges. The ranch continued to prosper, growing into one of the most successful operations in the territory. Samuel and Rose grew into confident, kind children who learned early about hard work and compassion. They saw their parents work as equal partners, saw their father treat their mother with unfailing respect and love, and internalized those lessons. Zelda's leg never improved, and some years it worsened with age and the demands of the work. But it ceased to be something that defined her or limited her sense of self-worth. She was Zelda Hayes, successful businesswoman, devoted mother, beloved wife, and pillar of the Prescott Valley community. The limp was simply a fact, no more significant than the color of her eyes or the shape of her face. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Garrett took her back to the meadow where he had proposed. The children were with Elizabeth, giving them a rare evening alone. They sat on the same sun-warmed rock, watching the sunset paint the valley in gold. "Do you remember what you said to me the night I asked to court you?" Garrett asked, his arm around her shoulders. "I said I would slow you down," Zelda replied, leaning into his warmth. "And do you remember what I said? That we would walk together slowly?" Garrett turned her to face him, his eyes serious. "I want you to know, Zelda, that these past 10 years with you, walking at whatever pace we needed, have been the best years of my life. I would not trade a single moment, not the hard days or the painful ones or the times when things were difficult, because all of it was with you, and that makes every step worthwhile." Tears gathered in Zelda's eyes. "I love you so much. You saved me, you know. Not just from poverty or loneliness, but from believing I was less than whole. You taught me that I am enough exactly as I am." "You were always enough," Garrett said, kissing her forehead. "I just helped you see what was already there." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear, two people who had found each other against the odds and built something beautiful together. The years continued to pass. Samuel grew into a young man who shared his father's skill with cattle and his mother's head for business, eventually taking over more of the ranch operations. Rose developed a passion for teaching and opened a small school in Prescott Valley, educating the children of ranch families throughout the area. Garrett and Zelda grew older together, their hair silvering, their bodies bearing the marks of hard work and good living. Zelda's limp became more pronounced with age, and there were days when walking was difficult. But Garrett was always there, offering his arm, adjusting their pace, never making her feel like a burden. They became grandparents when Samuel married a spirited young woman named Catherine and had children of their own. Rose eventually married a teacher from a neighboring town, and her children added to the growing Hayes family. The ranch house was often filled with the noise and chaos of grandchildren, and Zelda and Garrett loved every moment. On a warm summer evening many years after their wedding, Zelda and Garrett sat on the porch of the ranch house, watching the sun set over the mountains they both loved. Their hands were clasped, fingers intertwined in the easy way of people who had spent decades together. "You ever think about that day in Kennewick?" Garrett asked softly. "The day Thomas left you at the altar?" "Sometimes," Zelda admitted, "but not with pain anymore. If he had not been a coward, I never would have come to Prescott Valley. I never would have met you or built this life. In a strange way, I am grateful to him for showing me what I deserved by showing me what I did not." "I am grateful to him too, then," Garrett said, squeezing her hand. "Because his loss was my greatest gain." They sat in peaceful silence, two people who had walked life's journey together at their own pace, proving that love was not about perfection or keeping up, but about choosing each other every day and building something lasting together. Samuel came out onto the porch, his own children trailing behind him. "Mother, Father, we are thinking of expanding the south pasture next year. I wanted to get your thoughts on the logistics and costs." Zelda and Garrett exchanged a smile. Even in their later years, they were still partners in every sense of the word, still contributing to the ranch they had built together. "Come sit," Zelda said, making room on the porch. "Let us talk it through." As the family gathered around them, discussing plans and dreams for the future, Zelda felt a profound sense of contentment. This was the life she had been meant to live all along. Not the one she had planned in Kennewick with a man who saw her as defective, but this one, filled with love, purpose, hard work, and the deep satisfaction of knowing she was valued for exactly who she was. The ranch thrived for many more years under the Hayes family stewardship. Samuel proved to be as capable a manager as his father, with Zelda's business acumen and Garrett's skill with cattle. The Triple H became legendary in the territory, not just for its success, but for the way it treated workers fairly and contributed to the community. Rose's school grew into a respected institution, educating generations of children in Prescott Valley and the surrounding areas. She never forgot the lessons her mother had taught her about resilience, about finding ways around obstacles rather than being stopped by them. As Zelda and Garrett moved into their 70s, they gradually handed over more responsibilities to the younger generation, but they remained active and engaged. They spent their days together, sometimes working on smaller projects, sometimes simply enjoying each other's company and watching their legacy unfold around them. One evening, as they prepared for bed after a family dinner filled with children and grandchildren, Zelda paused while brushing her hair and looked at Garrett's reflection in the mirror. "What is it?" he asked, noticing her expression. "I was just thinking about something you said on our wedding day. You said that marriage was about being patient, being present, and loving each other through everything. You have done that every single day for all these years, Garrett. You have never once made me feel like my leg was a burden or a problem to be solved. You just loved me. How did I get so lucky?" Garrett came to stand behind her, his hands on her shoulders. "I am the lucky one, Zelda. You took a chance on me on this life, even though you had every reason to be afraid. You brought intelligence, strength, and love to everything you touched. You made me better, made this ranch better, raised children who are making the world better. That is not luck. That is you being extraordinary." She reached up to cover his hands with hers. "We are quite the pair, are we not?" "The very best pair," he agreed, kissing the top of her head. They had good years ahead of them still. Years filled with watching grandchildren grow, seeing the ranch continue to prosper, and enjoying the quiet contentment that comes from a life well lived and shared with someone who truly understands and values you. When Garrett passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, it was after a particularly good day working alongside Zelda on the ranch accounts, discussing plans for the spring planting, and enjoying dinner with family. Zelda was devastated by the loss, but she took comfort in knowing they had lived every day to its fullest, that nothing had been left unsaid or undone between them. She remained active and engaged for several more years, still contributing to the ranch management, still advising Samuel on business matters, still teaching her grandchildren and great-grandchildren the lessons she had learned about resilience and self-worth. When she followed Garrett a few years later at the age of 74, it was with a sense of peace and completion. She had lived a full, rich life, had loved and been loved deeply, had raised a family and built a legacy. The girl who had stood humiliated at an altar in Kennewick had become a woman who changed lives, including her own, by refusing to accept anyone's definition of her worth but her own. At her funeral, the church in Prescott Valley was packed with people whose lives she had touched. Samuel spoke about her strength and business acumen. Rose spoke about her compassion and wisdom. The ranch hands, some of whom had worked for the Hayes family for decades, spoke about her fairness and kindness. And Elizabeth Hayes's grandson, now running his own successful ranch, spoke about how his great-grandmother had taught the entire territory that physical limitations meant nothing in the face of a determined spirit. But perhaps the most touching tribute came from Samuel's oldest daughter, who had been named Zelda in her honor. The young woman stood at the pulpit and said simply, "My grandmother taught me that we all walk at different paces, and that is okay. What matters is not how fast you go, but who walks beside you and whether you lift each other up along the way. She and my grandfather walked together slowly for more than 50 years, and in doing so, they showed all of us what real love and partnership looks like. The Triple H Ranch remained in the Hayes family for generations to come, each new owner learning the stories of Garrett and Zelda, the couple who had built something lasting not despite their challenges, but by meeting them together with grace, love, and unwavering commitment to each other. In Prescott Valley, the story became something of a legend, told and retold with variations over the years. But the heart of it remained the same. A woman who had been told she was not good enough found a man who saw her true worth, and together they built a life that proved love is not about perfection, but about choosing each other, walking together at whatever pace life requires, and building something beautiful in the process. The meadow where Garrett had proposed became a special place for the Hayes family, visited by each new generation to remember the legacy of love and partnership that had started there. A simple wooden bench was placed on the spot where Garrett and Zelda used to sit, with a plaque that read, "Then we'll walk together slowly, Garrett and Zelda Hayes, who proved that love adjusts its pace." Years turned into decades, and the American West changed dramatically from the wild frontier territory where Zelda had first arrived. But in Prescott Valley, among the families who worked the land and built their lives with hard work and determination, the story of the limping bride and the rancher who loved her remained a touchstone, a reminder of what mattered most. Samuel's son, named Garrett after his grandfather, eventually wrote a book about his grandparents, based on Zelda's journals and the stories passed down through the family. It was published in the early 1920s and became a modest success, introducing their story to people far beyond Prescott Valley. Letters came from readers, many of them women who had felt limited by physical disabilities or other challenges, saying how much the story had meant to them, how it had given them courage to believe they deserved love and respect, regardless of their limitations. The book's success led to Samuel and Rose establishing a foundation in their parents' names, providing support for people with physical disabilities in the territory, funding medical care, and advocating for equal treatment and opportunities. It was a fitting tribute to Zelda, who had spent her life proving that limitations need not limit one's contribution or worth. The Triple H Ranch continued to prosper through changing times, adapting to new technologies and methods while holding fast to the core values Garrett and Zelda had established. Fair treatment of workers, smart business practices, and the understanding that every person has value and something to contribute regardless of their physical capabilities. In the small cemetery on a hill overlooking the ranch, 2 headstones sat side by side under an old oak tree. Garrett Hayes, beloved husband, father, and partner, and Zelda Hayes, beloved wife, mother, and inspiration. Between them, a single word was carved into the shared base, together. And that was how they remained, even in death, just as they had been in life. Together, walking at their own pace, proving that the best partnerships are built not on perfection but on acceptance, not on keeping up but on choosing to walk the journey side by side, adjusting to each other's needs and building something that lasts far beyond a single lifetime. The sun still sets over that meadow in the same glorious shades of gold and pink that Garrett and Zelda loved. The ranch still sprawls across the valley, productive and thriving under the care of their descendants. And on quiet evenings, when the wind moves through the grass just right, it almost seems like you can hear the echo of their voices, laughing together, planning together, living together in the fullness of a love that overcame every obstacle simply by refusing to see them as obstacles at all. Theirs was a story of the American West, of building something from nothing, of hard work and determination. But more than that, it was a story of love in its truest form, a love that saw past surface imperfections to the person beneath, that chose partnership over convenience, that proved the strongest foundations are built not on perfection but on acceptance, patience, and the willingness to walk together slowly, when that is what life requires. And in the end, that was their greatest legacy, more valuable than the successful ranch, more lasting than any material wealth. They showed everyone who knew them that real love does not demand you keep pace or change who you are. Real love adjusts its stride, takes your hand and says, "Then we will walk together slowly," meaning every word and making it the most beautiful promise in the world.